recording. So I'll just repeat that bit. So I haven't sent out a list of what you need because I want you to be able to just follow along and watch, and then I'll send out the recording and you can do it again with the recording, and that way you'll be able to pause and do each step, because hopefully I'll go a bit faster than you will the first time you do it at home. And so if you're trying to follow along, then it'll get confusing. So you'll just be able to use the recording and pause it when you need to. Okay, let's just do that poll then and see where everyone's from. I did say this is going to work for all planes of development, so I'll talk a little bit about each one, but I'm just going to send the poll out for you to tell me which age of children you're working with and you're interested in. There we go. Okay, so I think you guys can't see that. We've got a couple in 0 to 3. Oh, lots in 3 to 6, mostly 6 to 12, a couple of 12 to 15, and a couple of others. So 2 12 to 15, 87% 6 to 12, and 20% 3 to 6, and a couple of 0 to 3s. Okay, lovely. Cool, thanks for that. Oh, I'll just close that. All right, so let me just say a little bit about the relevance to each plane of development. So I'm 6 to 12 trained. I'm not 3 to 6 or 12 to 15 trained. I know a little bit about them, but I wouldn't like to actually write or speak with any kind of authority about those levels of teaching. But I know that our 3 to 6 teachers and our 12 to 15 teachers use felting. So in 3 to 6, it's very sensorial. It's really cool for them to grate the soap and roll the felt and get their hands in the water, and also understand permanence of change. You turn this fluffy wool into something that's solid and quite hard, and you can't unchange it. So that's quite a cool lesson for the 3 to 6. But all of the lessons, which I've actually, everything I'm going to show today is written up in The Work of Wool, my book that's available through my website. A lot of it's actually on my website as well. I've put the lessons up over the last few years. If you do a search for felt, you'll find some of the lessons written up on there. But they're written for 6 to 12. But you just need to adapt them, like you take out the talking, right, for the 3 to 6, and do a lot more of the demonstration with your hands rather than talking about it. In the second plane, I'll talk about that as I go along. There's loads of applications that it's useful for the second plane. And then for the third plane, I think the most relevant, apart from the art, which we shouldn't overlook because that's incredibly important too, but the use for it, aside from the artistic expression and the creativity, is microeconomy. So I'm going to show you how to make felt balls, which can be made, into beads for necklaces. They can be made into just balls for fun. When my children were little, I made a whole heap of these felt balls, and I made them really, really soft, and then we could throw them at each other and around. And they're also dryer balls to put in your tumble dryer. So they save electricity, save energy, save money, and they're great for the environment. So they're a really good microeconomy. I'm having trouble with my throat today. Slow down. They're a really good microeconomy product for the 12 to 15s, as well as making felt pictures that can be turned into bags, pencil cases, all sorts of products that can come quite easily. If they've been learning the skills in the 6 to 12, by the time they get to 12 to 15, they shouldn't actually need these lessons. They should just be able to apply their skills to make some really cool products. Okay, so let's talk about what felt is. It's wool that's been turned, or animal fibers, generally wool, I'll talk about that in a minute, that this has been sheared from a sheep, and then it's been washed, brushed, or carded, it's called. Sometimes dyed. This hasn't been dyed. And then it's been, as it's taken off the carding machines, it's pulled into a long strip. So this is called roving. And this is made up of loads of tiny little hairs. I don't know if I can even pull one. Can you see the individual hairs? Individual hairs. This is really, really fine wool. It's not always that thick. In fact, I'm going to screen share now a picture. Can you see that? Yeah. So this is wool, well, this is different fibers under a microscope. So if we start with the coarse wool, on this side here, you can see that there are scales on the wool and they all overlap slightly. And the coarse wool is thicker and it's got bigger scales. And then the fine wool is thinner with, actually they're not necessarily smaller scales, but you can see they're kind of a bit more aligned. And that's why some people that are allergic to wool find that they can wear merino wool, which is the very finest wool there is, because that doesn't make them itch, but they are allergic to coarser wool. And that's why we don't like to wear wool products next to our skin. And then the next one over is alpaca, that's got very fine scales, and cashmere that's got quite big scales, but they lie nice and flat. So if we look at those three, slow down, and we think about if you've ever put a wool jumper or a cashmere jumper in the washing machine by accident, then it comes out and it's tiny and all shrunk together and you can't unshrink it. And the reason for that is the scales that are all overlapping, when there's friction and heat and liquid, they kind of lift a little bit and then they mix into each other and then they sit down again and you can't get them out. And if it's your favorite cashmere jumper, then you really didn't want that to happen. But, and it's really worth knowing that that happens, because when we're washing wool that comes off the sheet before we come to felt or spin it, we don't want it to felt, so we have to be very careful. But when we're felting, we want that to happen. We want to lift the scales and bring them back together, and then they can't be unlocked. And so if you look at the silk on the image there, and the linen and the cotton and the polyester, you can see they haven't got scales. And so they won't felt. There are actually some really cool ways you can use it in your felting project. Silk's fantastic to add tiny bits because they go all wiggly as the wool shrinks and the silk stays the same size, and that's some experimenting with children can do. But you can see that most animal fibers will felt, but looking at the alpaca and the coarse wool and the fine wool, you can see that the fine and the coarse are going to felt better than the alpaca because it's got more pronounced scales. And you can actually, if you pick a hair from your own head, can't see me? Oh, that's weird. Okay, I'll stop the screen share. Okay, if you pick a hair from your own head and you slide your fingers down it, then you'll find that it's nice and smooth one way and it's rough the other way, and get the children to do that and they can feel the scales in their own fur. And so actually human fur does felt not very well. And sometimes the children will try it. They used to try and felt like dog's fur. They used to brush the dog and then try and add that to their felter, which I always found kind of gross, but they like the experiment. So sometimes you can blend it and mix it with some wool is the best thing to felt. When you are choosing your wool to felt, this stuff I just showed you, the white stuff, this is super fine merino. I wouldn't even use this for what I'm about to do. It's just that I wanted to use white today and I didn't have any other. It's a bit sacrilegious really, because this is like a cloud, it's gorgeous. You don't need really fine wool, but the finer it is, the quicker it felts. And sometimes that's an advantage and sometimes that's a disadvantage. And I'll show you why in a minute. You got rabbit fur, would that work? Yeah, yep. Oh, sorry. Can you guys hear James when he asks the questions? Are you getting a response? No. Otherwise, I have to repeat all the questions. No, can't hear you. Okay. So, some can. Okay. So, James said, what about rabbit fur? What about felt? Yes, most animal fur. But it's an awesome experiment. You can just try felting a little bit and see if it felt. Some will take longer than others. Okay, so there are two ways to create felt that we can do in the classroom. One is with friction and soap and water, and I'm going to tell you a story about that in a minute. I always introduce with a story, but I'm going to tell you the story after we've got started, just to save time. So you can either do it the way we're going to do wet felting, or you can needle felt. And I showed these needles in the last webinar on preparing the environment. They've got these little barbs on them. Can you see the barbs? The camera's not really focusing on them. There you go. They're little hooks. And what they do is they go into the fibers and they pull the fibers up and down with them, and you stab them in and out, and that mangles all the fibers together until they're completely joined and you get some solid felt that you can't undo. So that's one way of doing it. And the other way I'm just about to show you. And there are advantages and disadvantages to both. You can add a bit more detail with needle felting, and you can use both of them together, which is really nice. All right, let's do some felting. We're going to make a felt ball. I'm just going to grab some hot water. Just cooled down a bit from when I put it out before I was going to heat it up. You can skip this bit on the recording. All right, so I start with felt balls for the children, and you can do this from the age of, I don't know, my children were doing it at 3 or 4 with a little bit of help. Certainly in the, from 5 they can do it, certainly in the 6 to 12. Let's see now, screen share, second camera, go. Okay, right, can you see me and the camera? James? No, can only see the camera. Annoying. Okay, good to know. All right, so I'm going to start with some roving. That's really annoying.
Yes,
you can see both.
Yeah, there's a little bar at the. There's a little bar at the side. And
great.
Once you expand it, we see you as well.
Great. So it might be your settings on your computer if you can't see me on both. So I've got some roving. I've just pulled a bit off. And all those fibres, all those little hairs that I showed you before, I want them to be in all different directions. Now, if you've done spinning already with the children, they will know how to pull roving apart. If you haven't, they'll get it like this, really close together, and they'll try and pull, and you can't because they're hairs. It's like getting your hair like this. You can't pull it apart. But if you put your hands far apart and you just pull gently, it comes really, really easily because the fibres are all sliding over each other rather than breaking the actual fibres. So, you know those scales that we looked at before, you want those to be in all different directions. And when it comes off the carding machine or off your carding brushes, if you've done it yourself, you're going to have aligned the fibres quite a bit. So they're all lying neatly like this, which is not going to felt as easily as if you mix them all up. So I'm pulling and I'm pulling and I'm trying to get it even-ish. So I've got no big lumps or pockets, but I'm just muddling my fibres as much as I can. And I've forgotten to grate my soap. In my water, I need soap. Now, the first rule of wet felting is keep the wet and the dry fibres separate. That's super important because if the children bring your lovely basket of all your dry fibres over to the table where they're wet felting, then the whole lot gets wet and you have to either lay it all out and dry it, or you have to pull off the wet bits and get rid of them. It's frustrating and it's wasteful. So you keep wet and dry separate. I always have a dry-handed helper. And so you have a few children that are wet felting, they get their hands wet, and then the dry-handed helper will go off and get them a bit more wool if they need it, or push their sleeves up for them, refresh their water if it gets too cold, and they love being the dry-handed helper. Generally, it's, you know, it'll be that person's turn to felt next, and they do a bit of a swap. But it's a fun job. You can use any soap. This soap I'm using, we made. So we do a fundamental needs camp where we try and make absolutely everything that we need for the camp ourselves. We spend all year preparing for it. So we made these little beeswax wraps, and this is really nice citron. Oh, I've got above the camera. I was going to sit down. Okay. Citronella soap. And then I have a little grater, and the block of soap sits with the grater and all the felting stuff on the shelf. Now, you can decide whether it's going to work to keep your soap on the shelf or somewhere else, because the children don't always dry it before they put it back in, and you end up with this squidgy ball of mess. So, I'm raising my camera a bit, couldn't I? I thought I had it. You just got a book and put it under there, then the camera will be a bit higher. Here, just on there. Just in between the whiteboard. So I'm just grating some soap into my water. You need like half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of grated soap. You might need another one. Is that a bit better? No, it needs Oh yeah, that's it. That's great. Thanks. Yeah, I'll keep my hands up. Great. So now I've got, oh no, it's not. Let's go higher. This worked so well when I tested it before. Okay, no, it's fine. I've got it. I'll just move the thing. So I've got my fluffy ball of mixed up fibers, and I'm just going to roll them just a little bit. Now, I need to wet it, so you can either submerge it, I'll just mix some soap in. You can either submerge it or you can scoop the water up. With the younger children, the teachers in R3 to 6 have found that they prefer to scoop the water over because submerging it makes them completely crush it. I prefer to submerge it. I can't fully in here because I tried to use a shallower dish to show you. So I'll just turn it over. Yeah.
Can I use liquid soap?
Yeah, you can use any soap. So you can try all different kinds, but yeah, and any soap will do. Hand soap, liquid soap, olive oil, soy, whatever you want to use.
And how warm is the water?
Right, so that's really important. So if you're using anything but merino, then you want it to be as warm as the child is comfortable with. The warmer the water is, the faster it will felt. If you're using merino, this is what happens if it's too hot. Right, let's put that down. What's happened here is, and you'll see in a minute when I try and roll it, is the child's put it into really hot water and they've rolled it really hard, and so it's felted into little lumps to itself before it's had a chance to bond with all of the fibers. And this was great. They did this last week and I was like, Swae, can I have that so I can show it at the weekend? But you'll get a couple. You need to try this yourself a couple of times before you try it with the children, because you'll get a feel for it. Your first ball will come out a little bit lumpy with a few cracks in it, and then your second one will be better and your third one will be perfect.
What does the soap do?
Yeah, that it lubricates and lifts the scales, I believe. I wouldn't like to speak with full authority on that, but I know that it makes it go a lot quicker and better. You can do it without these things. You'll see from when I tell you the story of felt, you don't need all of those factors. You don't need heat. You can do it cold, but it takes longer. You don't need soap. You can do it without, but it takes longer. You do need friction. So I'm rolling this now. I've just wet it and I'm trying really hard to keep the shape. I'm rolling this really, really gently. And I say to the children, you need to treat this like it's the most precious egg, the last of its kind that you have to take really good care of. And you're just gently caressing it. And while I'm going round and round quite a lot, and you want to get a full loop when you go around, otherwise you get like a pointy bit on the top and the bottom. It looks like a bit like a flying saucer. So you're trying to get a good roll, but you're putting on the least pressure you possibly can to get it to roll around. If you put pressure on, it will felt in the middle before it felts on the outside, and then you will get cracks and valleys, just like when the earth formed and the surface cooled. And that's quite a cool thing to refer to with the children, but they don't want that. If you do get cracks, which you will, then you just reach into that little crack and you try and pull the fibers from below up and out, and then you roll again. And so you keep stopping and you keep checking for cracks. And it's that same bit again. I'm just going to pull the fibers out to get it a bit more even, and then roll and roll and roll. And we're literally just rolling here. If it gets cold, we're going to dip it in again. We're going to keep it wet, and we're just going to roll and roll and roll and roll until it feels like a ball. And then, and this is the bit you kind of need to get the knack for, is you're going to gradually increase your pressure and speed until it forms a ball. And then what you'll find the children and adults will ask over and over again, is it done yet? Is that enough? And the answer is always no. You can always felt it a little bit more. With the balls, it's up to you how hard you want them to be. But they will feel a little bit softer when they're dry than when they're wet. So if you want it to be reasonably firm, if you want to make these beads, you want them to be reasonably firm. If you want it to be something you can cut open, that I'll show you in a minute, you want it to be quite firm. But if they're to throw around, then maybe you want them a bit softer. But you do kind of want it to feel even all the way through. Okay, so that's gone. I didn't fully pull that crack out so you can see it, but it doesn't matter. I could still make that go away by pulling it out and rubbing a bit harder, but I'm just going to give it a bit more now, because that's basically your felt ball made. So you can make these now into beads. You can use them to make models of the Earth or the planets. There's a lot of calculation to be done with working out the relative sizes. And if they want to be accurate with their kind of ratios, then they need to weigh the wool to start with, work out its shrinkage, work out the colors. And we can do the layers of the Earth, which is, I should have started with a different color if I was going to do that, which is really good fun. So I'm just going to get my dry-handed helper, who doesn't exist, to get me a different color. Oh, you could have done it already. Okay, so I've taken a little bit more fiber. Have you got questions of this bit, love?
Is it rolled gently?
Yeah, to begin with, you're going to roll super, super gently. And then you can add a bit more pressure and you'll feel it. That's why you just need to practice it. Go really gently to start with. Keeping it, so you'll know you're pressing too hard because you'll lose the kind of spherical shape. So now I'm going to add a second layer. So this is really great for layers of the Earth, but it's also good. Like if you want to make geodes, I'm not really into the idea of making geodes because I just don't think it represents it enough, but people like to. Or just because they're pretty, people use it for pin cushions and all sorts of things. I'll show you. I'm going to wrap, oops, I'm out of the picture. I'm going to wrap more of this fiber. Now, remember how I muddled it before? I'm not muddling it now, so I have to be a bit more careful and go over in different directions because this is going to be slightly harder to do because I haven't mixed my fibers quite so well. So I've tried to just coat it evenly, and I'm going to dunk this in, and it's going to go all loose, and I'm going to feel like it's going to fall apart. Pretty much every felting project, it suddenly goes all loose, and you think, oh no, I've ruined it, and then it starts to shrink and come together. Wool will shrink by about 30%. It totally depends on the wool. So that's another really good maths thing that you can do with your 12 to 15s or your 9 to 12s is they can lay out, you'll see when I do the pictures, they can lay out a square of felt and measure it and then calculate its area and then calculate the area of it once it's shrunk. So I'm rolling gently again. I haven't been quite as careful as I should have been because I was talking and I've got that kind of bagginess I was talking about, the oh no, it's gone wrong. So
Are you spinning it around in one direction?
Oh, I probably am, but it doesn't matter. In fact, every direction's better. The more you're turning it, the more you're interfering with it, the more friction you're getting, the more muddled it will get. And you can see now that's starting to come together as a second layer, and it will tighten up and it will go hard like the first layer. And you want to have not felted the first layer really hard before you add the second one if you want them to join on. Otherwise, you end up with loose layers that come apart afterwards. I'll show you what I mean. Any more?
Where do you find a good source for getting your wool?
Yeah, I'm in New Zealand, which is, I don't think many of you are. I reckon you can probably get it on, hands down. I reckon you could probably get it on Amazon. I think you just need to do a bit of a search. Actually, the people I get it from in New Zealand do ship internationally, and they are really, really good. So maybe I'll put the link up. How do I do that? When I post the video, I'll put it because, so I order from them, I order Romney for spinning and felting, and they sell it by the kilo. They do, I think they call it carousel or rainbow or something, and they do these balls, 100 grams of each, so you get 10 balls of different colors, and that will last your class 6 months to a year.
Whereabouts in New Zealand are you?
I'm near Wellington, in Lower Hutt, but they're right down the south of New Zealand. They send it, and I know they posted it because they sent it out for the EAA conference, and they might even be cheaper than buying it locally. They're really good and they're really cheap, and you tell them it's for a school and they always throw in extra stuff for me. So yeah, I'll post that. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. Okay, look, that layer's gone fairly solid now. It's not that round. I haven't been paying attention to the cracks, but I'm going to stop because I think you get the idea from that, and if not, you'll be able to just replay this bit and hopefully see what I did, but I'll show you what happens next. These are some of the balls the kids made in my class this week. So they've got a variety of layers and sizes and colors, because of course when they start they don't know exactly what size it's going to come out, and they've added layers. In fact, when I made these, and if I do beads with the children and they want them to all be the same, we weigh the fiber to make sure that they're all going to come out the same size. Okay. This is an exciting bit now, and this is a surprise for me because I didn't make this. One of the children did it for me to demonstrate, so I have no idea what's in it. Oh, I can do it down there. I'm going to cut it open. Don't cut them until they're dry. If you cut it before it's dry, the inside bit will bulge. Now, you need to try and do this in as few cuts as possible because you don't want it to be, you don't want to have those kind of cut marks. Oh, wow, this is a great one.
There's a company in the US called Living Felt that sells bulk at good prices.
Oh, great. Thank you. Okay, look at that. How cool is that?
How long does it usually take to dry?
Oh, ages. You can throw them in the tumble dryer, but they depends on your climate, I guess. This one's a few days old and it's still very wet in the middle, but it's winter here and it's cold. So look at that. How cool is that? We've got all these circles and then this sphere in the middle. So you can imagine if we did those in the colors of the layers of the earth. I think I put the picture of that on the Facebook page for the webinar. And then there's some really cool maths you can do here because you can work out the volume of your sphere, but then you can work out by measuring them the volume of every other sphere or hemisphere, and you can work out the area of each circle by subtracting the previous area. So there's a lot of fun, or adding it or whatever. So there's a lot of fun you can have. You can see that they mixed some colors in the middle there, and then just, yeah, put different color layers on top, and this outside one's not actually felted particularly well, so they could have gone a little bit harder on that one, but they've got it fairly even. That's quite good. Cool. All right, any questions on felt balls? James? Yeah, okay, let's do felt pictures. I'm just going to turn my hair back actually. Okay, so I'm going to move. Sorry?
How did you overlap the balls?
So that was the layers that I put on. So when I put the, I did the first one just now, and then I added that yellow layer, and that's how you add them. So yeah, that pinky one inside would have been the first ball they did to begin with, and you can see they muddled it really well because it's got all different colors mixed in. And then the way I wrapped the yellow just now was how they've created green, I think's next. And then they just, yeah.
How do you thread them if they're hard felted?
Oh, they're not, I mean, they're still wool, so they're reasonably, this one's really quite soft. So they're actually really good for pin cushions. And you can just stick all your pins in there on your shelf. But yeah, you can just stick a needle and thread through. I use fishing line, but it'll just go through with quite a long needle. Yeah.
Do you have to wait for each layer to completely dry before adding another layer?
No. No, and you don't want to felt it too hard either so they join together. But no, you can just carry on adding layers. And if you run out of time, you can leave it and you can start again the next day. It doesn't really matter. It'll still be damp, or you could just wet it down again. You can always add to it. Okay, I'm going to show you the basket. Which camera should I be on? This one. Basket of felting bits and pieces from my shelf. I've just already taken out the grater and the soap. So I've got, there's pieces of net curtains. I should probably overlap the edges. Bubble wrap, sponges, and a container for your water, sushi mat. You also need some towels. Keep those in the art area, and your wool. And so I start by putting down something to protect the table if your table is not waterproof, but mine's fine. So I put down some sort of plastic covering if you need to. Then you put a towel just to soak up, oh, I've got to stop knocking the table, just to soak up any extra water. And then a piece of bubble wrap. This gives us our friction. And then your sushi mat, which is what you're going to make your picture on and you're going to roll it with that way. And then we're going to need our cloth in our net curtain in a minute. So to make a felt picture, it's the same principle. We want to muddle our fibers, but we also want to keep them really, really even. So that's why I start with the ball, because we can afford to be a bit more gung-ho with our muddling. And with our picture, we really want to be a bit more accurate. So remember how I showed you just to pull off little bits of the fiber? You want to pull what's called a staples length. So that's the length of one of the hairs of the animal, and it will vary according to your wool. But if you just hold it from the end very gently and you pull like that, you'll get roughly one staple length, and then you lay it down on your mat. and we're going to cover our mat. We're going to overlap them a little bit and do it quite ordered in a row. Actually, I'll just bring it in a bit and then I'll do a smaller one. I was going to cover the whole mat. Okay. And you can do a few rows, and you're trying to really kind of systematically cover your sushi mat or your area that you want to felt. So now I've got one layer, and it's going to be really thin. If I press it down, I can see there are some thin patches. It's not completely even. So I'm going to go the other way. We've gone horizontally. Now we're going to go vertically, and we're going to overlap our fibers to cover our little square. Picture doesn't have to be square, but it's easy to start with. Okay, so we're doing 3 layers. We've done horizontally, we've done vertically. So the children will then want to go oblique. If they've had their lines lessons, then obviously the third one's oblique, but that's quite hard to make it in a square oblique. So you can go back to horizontally, or you can just let them go for it. The aim is to get an even coverage. This is coming out really thin, actually. If it's super thin, I might have given it a 4th layer, but I won't. Okay, so now I've got a nice little square cloud that's the background for my picture. So I can then create a picture, and you can actually be really detailed. They can take their time and they can create quite a detailed picture with their fiber. We call it painting with wool. And they can make little twists and curls and have some fun with it. Let's see what picture. We've created a rainbow with some raindrops there, and I've got another one I'll show you in a moment when we get rolling. I'm just going to make a little black noun. Any questions there, James?
Going back to the ball you were making, can you add layers once the ball has dried?
Yeah, you just need to wet it again. As long as you haven't felted it super solidly, then you'll struggle, because there'll be nothing left for the fibers to bind with. Like, felt gets to a point where you can no longer felt it because it's done. But if it's not super hard felted, you can always wet it and add to it. And then you can needle felt onto it as well. So if the children have done the layers of the earth, they can then needle felt the continents on. I might have put a picture of that up, I'm not sure. Somebody did that. Okay, so I've just made a little black triangle for my noun. It's not very accurate because I didn't want to take all day over it. Hopefully it will come out roughly triangular. And then the reason for this net curtain, everything's backwards, it's really hard working mirror images. Okay, the reason for this net curtain is to hold our fibers in place just while we get them started. Get rid of all my wet wool, all my dry wool from my wet area. Bring back my soapy water. My sponge. Mowgli, can you move that book for me, please, so I don't splash it?
Is net curtain like gauze?
Yeah, I think gauze is a little bit. No, leave it. I want that page. I just move it over there. Thanks. Yeah, gauze is cotton, whereas net curtain's synthetic, so it'll be harder for it to join to. You can use that toil stuff. I can't remember what it's called. The kind of netting tutus are made from. I just use curtains because it's cheap, but basically you want a loose weave mesh that you can get. You know, I use net curtains because you can get them from charity shops for free, but yeah, a loose weave mesh will work. And it's just because you want to be able to move the water through it. Look, I'm going to cover it, but you don't want the fibers to grip onto it. And you'll see in a minute that they do. So now I'm using my sponge to pick up the water, and sponges are great for this. You can do it in all different ways. People use squirty bottles, but sponges can put the water on and take it off. And I just want to wet it enough, really gently and evenly, pressing down and up again, not rubbing. I don't want to mess up my picture. Pressing down until I can see that all my fibers are wet. And now this bit takes some time. I'm just going to add a bit more soap. So I didn't from before. That should be in the water, the soap. And now I'm just going to rub, and this is another time you have to be super, super gentle, because you're rubbing all your fibers against each other, and you've already just created this picture. So you don't want to be moving your fibers around, but you want to be encouraging them to join into each other. And this is one that the children will say, have I rubbed enough yet? And the answer is always no. So a big flat hand, don't just do it with your fingertips, or you'll be there forever. Big flat hand of rubbing, rubbing, rubbing.
and maybe refreshing your water, putting some on, taking it off. You just want it to be wet through, but not streaming water everywhere, but no dry patches. And rub in every direction because we're trying to make those fibers link into each other. James?
Another question.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, so does it need to be toned synthetic? And that's related to the mesh?
Yeah, I mean, cotton will grip slightly, it will felt, so synthetic is better. Now I'm going to peel this up because the fibers do grip onto the mesh, and you don't want that to happen. And if you leave it too long, you'll find they grip onto the mesh and then you can't get them up. They also grip onto the strings of the sushi mat, so you kind of have to peel it up. You can see it's holding together in one piece a little bit already. It won't last like that at the moment though. It'll come apart again. And look how much it's spread. It's come right off my sushi mat. So you can peel it up and then you can reshape it. Any fibers that have jumped out of place, you can push them back in, and really keep attending to this. This takes a long time. The children need to understand when they start this, this is not a quick piece of art, and they're going to have to put a lot of effort into it for some time. So I'm just going to rub this a little bit now to make the fibers grip. Anything?
Going back to your necklace, where's it gone?
I'm making the camera
How did you make the beads? Did you put a needle through them?
Yeah, so I just made all of the beads, and when they're all dry, I just threaded them onto probably a dole needle or a beading needle with fishing line in them, and just spaced them with some little wooden beads. Okay.
Another question.
Mm-hmm.
Why soapy water instead of plain water, and how soapy?
So about a teaspoonful of grated soap, maybe half a teaspoon. You'll feel it. You'll feel when you need more soap because it doesn't slide as easily. You need the lubrication, and that's basically it. I think it's just the lubrication to make the scales lift and drop again. Try it without soap and you'll feel that it's too hard. It makes it a lot easier to have the soap so your hands slide and the fibers slide over each other so that they can kind of mix up and grab each other.
Do you gradually increase the pressure?
Yeah, you can feel it. And each time you peel up and have a look, you'll see that it's felted just a little bit more. And up there you can see, I don't know if you can pick it up, but the fibers have gripped onto the mesh. And it's all right to happen a little bit, but you don't want it to happen a lot, or then you'll never be able to peel it off. So you have to keep taking off your mesh and putting it down again. Now, when you've got to a point where you can't really pinch the fibers separately, which I totally can now, or you can't really pinch out separate fibers, that's when you're ready to roll. And so that's going to take you quite some time to get to a point where you can't really pinch the fibers separately. If you roll too quickly, and I'll show you how to roll, if you roll too quickly, your picture's going to all slide. The reason we're doing this really gently now is we're trying to hold our picture in place, and this is the majority of the work, even though there's still a lot of work to come. This is the majority of the work in getting your picture to stay in place, and then we're going to roll just to harden up the felt and make it go really thick and hard. If you look at this one, it's really a solid piece of fabric. It's not going anywhere, and that's what we're trying to achieve. And at the moment I've still got quite a lot of loose fibers, so I'm going to go to rolling. I'm going to make sure that my water's still warm, so I'm going to use my sponge to pick up as much water as I can.
What type of soap is preferred?
Any soap's fine.
And did you add some grated soap directly onto the netting, or just the soapy water?
I did add it straight to the netting, but you don't need to. It's only because I just used the same water that I'd used for the soap, for the felt ball, and I just felt like it didn't have enough soap in it. So if your water's soapy, that's fine, or if you want to sprinkle it onto the netting, that's fine too. Okay, so I'm taking my bubble wrap and I'm going to fold it over my sushi mat. So that's right at the edge of my sushi mat now. So I've got my netting. Oh, it's just gone out of focus. Okay, I've got my netting, my bubble wrap, and my sushi mat, and my picture, and I'm rolling it up quite tightly here. Tell the children not to pop the bubbles in the bubble wrap. They see bubble wrap in the class, and the first thing they want to do is pop it, and then it's no good for felting. So I've got quite a tight little roll there. I want to hold it. So I'm going to put some, oh, did I show you the elastic bands? Add that to your list. I'm going to put some elastic bands hold it.
One of the questions is, would you supply a list of materials
Yeah.
so that people can begin it?
Yeah, the whole lot's written up in my book, and I think I've probably put it on my website. I have to have a look, but yes, I will put the list of materials. So now you're going to roll, and this is another bit where the children will say, "Am I done yet?" And the answer is no. You need to roll 100 times the full length of your hands and up to your elbows. So it's not just this. That's not really going to get you anywhere. It's only going to roll the bottom bit. You've got to go all the way over, and so they're leaning and rolling. And you've got to count to 100, but it's not 1, 2, it's 1, 2, and they'll go, what? So you've got to roll to 100, and it's not even done after that. Okay, I'm going to tell you a little story while Mowgli comes and does the rolling. Yeah? Yeah. So, I'm just going to rinse my hands. You're counting.
One question says, is this group work?
Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry, I'm watching my camera. Yeah, definitely group work. I would do it. I have probably 4 and 1 dry-handed helper, sometimes 2 dry-handed helpers. But I definitely do it with a group of children. Okay. So this is the story of the history of felt. My story, there are lots of stories of the history of felt that you will hear. And I tell this before I even start any of this felt work. So I'd give them a bit of felt to hold, I'd show them a bit of wool. Isn't it amazing how much we as humans know about our world? It's also amazing how much we still don't know and never will. You're right? No. Okay. This is felt. It's a kind of woolen fabric that's not woven or knitted. Felt is the oldest fabric known to mankind, and it's made using a whole different method all of its own. To this day, we humans use felt for all sorts of purposes, and would miss it if we didn't have it as a resource. Yet we don't really know who discovered it. Of course, humans are curious beings, and they like to figure out answers to questions. So there are lots of stories about who first discovered felt. We just can't be sure which one of them's correct. These stories generally involve a legendary hero or person of high religious importance. For example, the Sumerians believed that the secret of felt making was discovered by their great warrior, Uraman of Lagash. The discoverers in these stories were all very important people, which tells us how important felt making is to these cultures. But maybe felt making had more modest beginnings. Some people believe it was a humble shepherd who discovered felt, quite by accident. It's a shepherd's job to look after sheep, making sure they have enough food and water to grow strong and healthy so they produce meat. This could mean walking great distances in a day to find the best grass. Imagine a shepherd in ancient times walking around all day with his flock. His sandals would probably be made of some sort of leather, with straps holding them on. Imagine it's coming to the end of the summer, the grass is getting dry, possibly even turning brown and dusty. The sheep would need to walk very far to find enough to eat, and of course the shepherd would need to walk with them. But the leather in his sandals would be dry, and the dust would work its way under the straps. This would make them rub against his feet, making them sore and blistered. If you've ever had a blister, you'll know how annoying they are. You would not want to have to walk for several more hours with blistered feet, would you? Humans are inventive, and they like to find solutions to their problems. Maybe the shepherd tried to use some of the precious water from his water skin to wash the dust from his sandals. Maybe he tried to stuff some of the grass the sheep were eating under the straps. We don't know how many experiments he tried before he found the perfect solution. But at some stage, we think, our shepherd's eyes fell on the soft, fluffy fur of his sheep's back, and he thought that might be the answer. He carefully layered some of the sheep's wool between the skin of his feet and the leather of his sandals and went about his day, walking and herding. We don't know if our shepherd got any blisters that day, but we can guess what he discovered when he got home that night. When he sat down to take off his sandals, he would have found not the handful of loose fibres that he'd packed into his shoes that morning, but a single piece of fabric. The shepherd probably didn't know exactly why or how the wool turned to felt, but he probably did know that he'd made an amazing discovery, and he probably told lots of people about it, beginning the long tradition of felt making amongst his people. Now, it could be that all the stories about the discovery of felt are true. People did not have such easy methods of communication in ancient times as we do today, so perhaps the felt was discovered by several different people or peoples. What we do know is that felt has been very important in many cultures. Archaeologists have discovered examples of felt dating back to ancient times in several parts of the world. The earliest evidence of felt making is wall coverings found in Turkey, dating back as far as 6,500 BCE. Over 30 different examples of complex felt work were discovered in the tombs in Siberia from 300 to 400 BCE. And felt has been used in Central Asia for hats, horse blankets, boots, coats, and tents since the 4th century BCE. The ancient Romans found that it helped them in battle as it made light but robust armour, as well as tunics, boots and socks. In fact, by the 1st century CE, felt making was widely practiced in Western Europe, and felt making guilds were established with great pride. Ancient Chinese warriors also used felt for shields, as well as clothing and even boats. And the Chinese emperor was carried into the presence of his subjects on a felt mat. I wonder if any of these people who found so many uses for this wonderful fabric stop to think about how it was discovered. You might like to have a go at making felt for yourselves, and when you do, maybe you will think about the humble shepherd in our story and the gift of his discovery. So you can see that there's huge opportunities for, for horizontal and vertical studies of felt and how it's made and how it's used. So Mowgli's just rolled 100 times, so we're going to take it apart and have a look.
What has worked best to limit the materials so that children do not use all the wool, as well as the guidelines for what one can make with them?
Okay, can I just come back to that? I'll just show this. Sorry, and I'll come back to that. Okay, so I'll do it from this side. I'm peeling off the mesh. Oh, it's come off beautifully. And you can see that triangle has come out a bit. So it's got a couple of wrinkles in. I'm going to pull them straight and I'm going to rotate it. I don't know if you can see on the camera, but it's actually shrunk this way because that's the way we've been rolling. So it's kind of rectangular now and it started off square. So now I have to rotate the whole thing. Spread it out, change any little bits that I'm not happy with. I've still got a few fibers that I can move around. Anything that's crept out of place. You can see it's kind of taken on the lines of the sushi mat as well. So I can smooth those out a bit. Straighten my edges if I want. Get it exactly how I want it. Put my covering back over it. I'm going to refresh my water. My water's actually cooled down a bit now, so I will be asking my dry-handed helper, no, sorry, my dry-handed helper to warm it up a bit for me, which would mean grating a bit more. So you're going to roll again in a second. Okay. Roll it up nice and tight. If they do it too loose, it's really hard to roll because it's no longer round. Yeah, it's right. Put my elastic bands back on. My bubble wrap's a bit long for my sushi mat. It might have been better if it was a bit shorter. Someone's been doing bigger work. There you go, Mowgli. 100 the other way. I'm just going to rinse my fingers. Okay, what was the question? How to limit materials?
Yes, so that children don't use all the wool.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the same with any other materials that you would put out on your art or handwork shelf. If you can either put out what you want them to use, or when you give the lesson, talk about how much they need for a project. But with this felt picture, you're limited by the size of the sushi mat. So they want 3 thin layers on the sushi mat. You can use table mats as well. You can get bamboo table mats, and so you can go for slightly bigger pictures. But I guess you can limit the number of pictures they do. I don't. We have a lot of wool in New Zealand. It really goes a very long way. One of these pictures will use 10 to 20 grams of wool, and I spend 30 odd dollars, New Zealand dollars, what's that, 20 something US dollars on a kilo of wool. So it depends where you're getting it from, but it's not an expensive thing to do. It goes a long way, so I don't really worry about it. In fact, we made for our tents for camp, and we made rugs, and we made these great big felt rugs that they did things like the seasons. They did a spring, summer, autumn, winter panel on the rug, and the children lie on them, and they're thick, and it doesn't cost a lot. To do the bigger ones though, you obviously need a much bigger area, and because we don't have a sushi mat to help us roll it up, then we use a pool noodle. We roll that into the middle with the bubble wrap to keep the shape to roll, and it's a bit of a collective effort. And there was another part to that question, right?
Yeah. Oh, are there any limitations on what they can make?
Oh, I don't put limitations on it, but usually it comes from a lesson when we're talking about, where do we want to go from here? They might make, felt charts, felt volcanoes, anything they want to express coming out of a lesson. Or they might want to make a felt yurt. They might look into how yurts are made in Mongolia and decide they want to make the felt for it. And then they need to research the technique that the Mongolians use to make felt, which is slightly different.
Are all the steps done in one day, or can it be spread over a few days?
Yeah, it can be spread. So especially if they're getting, you're not going all the way to the end of your elbows. Go all the way along. That's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I'm back.
I've forgotten what I was on now.
Oh, sorry. Just guess.
Oh, 70.
So yeah, at this stage now, when it's all wrapped up, it's quite easy to store. If you have like a plastic basket or something to put them in, if you found that actually creating the picture took all their energy or all your time, you can get it to this stage where you can wrap it up, and then you can just leave it and come back the next day, unwrap it, refresh your water because it'll be cold, and keep going. So there are a few other methods of felting. Commercial felt, which might be made from wool. Usually it's synthetic. If you buy it in craft shops, it's usually synthetic. But commercial felt made from wool is made by needles in a factory. And so that's a really cool investigation for the children to do. And there's also traditional hat making, which was called carroting. There's a really cool story. That's in my book, but you can look it up. And carroting is a process that uses some pretty nasty chemicals, which the Mad Hatter was famed from because he went mad because the chemicals drove people mad, and it also turns you orange, which is why the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland has orange hair. You done 100? Thank you. Do you want one, Marie? For carroting? Oh, I'm pretty sure that's already on my blog. Will you see if you can? Oh, you can't do that.
You haven't got a search function.
Oh, I have. Yeah, I have got a search function on the blog. You have to go to one of the blog posts, and then at the top there's a little magnifying glass. It's hard to find. I'm sorry. So we just need to put it off. That's fine. Yeah, if I can find the link, I'll send it out. Yeah, with it. Yeah, so there's still a few bits. So because we didn't do a lot of the rubbing ahead of time, it hasn't really hardened as much as I'd like it to. But we've got a fairly solid piece of fabric there that's got a bit of a triangle on, and this is very light and thin. The children's ones will be thicker. So you can then make this into a bag. You can fold it in half and sew it, put a zip in it, make a little pencil case. You can use it as a patch on something. You just keep it as a picture. Mostly the children keep them as pictures. But where's that flower one? You can use it for all sorts of follow-up work. Someone's done the parts of the flower here. This was actually done by an adult. You can see how nice and evenly the needle felt of it. So they did the flower first, and then they needle felted on the parts of the flower, and they made the little labels, and this sits on the shelf in our 6 to 9 class, and then the children make their own versions, which are what were on the picture for the Facebook post for this webinar. So they can make all sorts of, a little book of all the concepts that they've learned by making the pictures in felt.
Someone's asking if you could please stop the screen share so you can see the pictures.
Oh, did it not come up properly? Okay, we can stop that now. Thanks, maybe. Maybe I can. Okay, there we go. All right. So that was there. So that's the picture of the flower that's got all the parts on, and she's got these little paper tickets that then the children can add instead of card material. And you can do that for all sorts of things for card material as well, but you don't need to do it for too much. You just want to give the children the idea that they could make this as their own version. Okay, so my table's not particularly wet now, but it does get incredibly wet when you do it with the children. So that's something to monitor when you're talking to them about it. I'm done. I'm done with the camera, yeah. Because where's it gone? No, that's right, but where's the little picture that we made just gone? They didn't show it with the camera back on. Oh.
Yes, right here.
Okay, so I'll just hold that up again. So it's not completely felted. So we'd either rotate it again and do another 100 rolls. You can give it a bit of a stretch each time you pull it. You actually help it felt. So if it hasn't come out the shape that you want, you can lay it out flat and stretch it, and see how it's got quite a bit of give to it. So felting's very, very forgiving. That's why it's such a cool thing to do with children. It's very versatile, but also forgiving. If they make a mistake, they can add to it, they can trim it, they can use the needle to correct any mistakes afterwards to do needle felting, which maybe we'll do another time. When you're done, I should have said this with the felt balls as well, when you're done with the wet felting with the soap, you need to wash the soap out. Wool doesn't like soap. It's the wrong pH. So it's alkaline and you want the wool to be slightly acid. So if you want your wool to last forever, I don't necessarily do this with the felt balls in the classroom because they're not going to last forever. But when you rinse it, put a little bit of vinegar in your rinsing water. So wash it under the tap, wash all the soap out. You can go a bit hot and cold as you're washing it, and that will felt it just a little bit more. It shocks it. And then in your final bit of rinsing water, just put a little bit of vinegar and give it a swish about and then rinse it out. And that will reset the wool's pH, and that just makes it a little bit happier and will last a bit longer. Yeah, if you want. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say. Oh, we're doing pretty well for time. Okay, great. I just saw a question come up. So thank you so much to those of you who donated to cover the cost of these webinars. I think we've pretty much got it covered now. Yeah, we have, which is great, which actually means if there's any extra, then I can give it to Education Sans Frontières, which I'm really happy to be able to donate to as a result of this. I'll let you know afterwards how much I was able to donate, so that's really great. If you want to order one of my books, they are on my website, but we are having problems with post at the moment. Because our borders are closed, we're not getting many flights coming in and out, which means post is very, very slow. So if you do want to order a book, please just be aware that they are taking some of them over a month, right? To get to people. And there's nothing I can do about that. Sorry. So thank you for coming. Please share photos of any felting that you do. Go to Montessori Homework Threads on Facebook and chat about it, ask your questions, share your experiences, answer people's questions. Let's get the homework conversations going so that we can get as many people doing it as possible. Yeah, that's it. Thanks very much. Goodbye.